sometimes as cold as -18, -20. After that, my bike stopped working because the grease freezes up halfway to work. About a 5-mile commute it was, and 500-foot elevation change as well. So I'm Daniel Stine, Director of Design Technology at Lake Flato here in San Antonio, Texas, where I now live. I am a Wisconsin registered architect. I teach graduate architecture and landscape architecture students at NDSU, which is in Fargo, North Dakota. This will be going on the 8th year of me teaching that class, all 8 years, 100% remote. So I was teaching remote before teaching remote was cool. I'm the author of 14 textbooks. One of those books is the #1 Revit book in North America. Just behind me here, I think right about there, I'm pointing to it, is the first Revit book, copyright 2003, that I started on Revit version 4.5 and ended up being Revit version 5. That copy there actually has Carol Bart's and Philip Bernstein's signature on it right after it came out, the CEO and Vice President of Autodesk. Do a lot of blogging, BIM chapters, and I write a lot of blog posts for Enscape. In 2019, I attended several conferences with Enscape, like Autodesk University London. And while we were there, we went to a Revit user group at KPF's London office. And then I also went to a conference in Scotland and AU Las Vegas and Midwest University and that CTC and now ATG put on, and just outside of Minneapolis at the Mystic Lake Casino. International speaker, presented in Singapore, Australia, Denmark, Scotland, Ireland, Slovenia, Vancouver, Toronto, and a bunch of places in the US. So I work at Lake Flato. It's in 2019, Architect Magazine named it the #1 firm in their Architect 50 list. And I think because of the pandemic, maybe they haven't done another ranking in 2020. So as far as I'm concerned, we're still #1. We've won more of the AIA Top 10 awards than any other firm, 13 of them. Been a member of the AIA 2030 commitment for 10 years and publishing our portfolio of energy analysis for all projects over those 10 years. And then, let's see. So here's a quick outline of the presentation, which is generally around the idea of design technology as a discipline within AEC, or a career path, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm going to talk, the next slide will be a little bit more about me, and I just mentioned about Lake Flato. And then I'm going to show you a few slides from a presentation that I gave to the firm. Part of this was while we were talking in the talks of me joining the firm and developing this new role, and how that kind of came about, which I think you'll find interesting. And then backing up a little bit and looking at design technology and those who might be aspiring to, get more into this role or position or activity within your firm. So things like titles in a firm, and books to read, and just other resources and things that you might consider doing. If you have questions and want to chime in, feel free. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going. I'm sure I can ramble on for an hour. Again, I'm a registered architect in the state of Wisconsin, which is where my friend Kyle is, right? Thumbs up. Yep. I'm a member of the AIA and CSI, so Construction Specification Institute. And within CSI, I have their Construction Document Technologist credential. I'm a member of the Autodesk Developer Network, and I'm an Autodesk Expert Elite. And as I mentioned, I teach at NDSU. Some highlights, things that I've done over the years that I'm fairly proud of, I guess. Implementing virtual reality and augmented reality. So the picture of me there with HoloLens 1 and the Trimble version of the hard hat that attaches to the HoloLens 1. And then I've also had access to my previous firm. We had a HoloLens 2, that's the Trimble XR10. It's a packaged HoloLens 2 or repackaged HoloLens 2 to fit properly on a hard hat in such a way that the visor flips up, and it's been tested for job site and safety, whereas other implementations like this, sort of an add-on to the HoloLens 2, aren't tested and safe for a project site. So lighting and early energy modeling, I've done a lot of work with lighting analysts and Illum tools in particular. If you go to their website, they sell a previously recorded series of webinars, and they're all me. And so me and one of their developers did a presentation at Light Fair in Chicago on lighting content for lighting analysis. So making it right with the photometry and the placement of the light source. I've done a lot with early energy modeling. One of the presentations I did in Ljubljana, Slovenia, on implementing early energy modeling into an architectural practice earned the #2 overall ranking for the speakers at that conference. And I know this is a multidiscipline group, so you'll probably appreciate this. I helped create the electrical productivity pack. My previous firm that I worked at, Minnesota, multidiscipline firm, started using Revit MEP pretty much the day it came out, and we created some really sophisticated electrical content and schedules, and approached CTC about partnering and creating this pack, and so that the rest was history. It's been in the works now for about 9 years, and hundreds of MEP and design firms and electrical contractors have purchased the pack and use it on their projects, and probably modified it quite a bit. But, being from Minnesota, I've presented at the AIA Minnesota convention for 4 years in a row. And again, the different places I've presented at. And then finally, partnerships. I've done a lot of interesting things with Dell, NVIDIA, Karen Timberlake, lighting analyst, Autodesk. So I'll get to a couple of those things in just a minute. Here, just a little snapshot of some of my books. So some of this is developing a little street cred, I suppose, for what I'm about to talk about, if you don't already know me. So I've written 14 books. These are just a few examples. The one on the right isn't being updated for 2022. All the other books have been updated. But the one on the right is also written with Jeff Hansen. He's one of the technical writers at Autodesk who sort of oversees the Revit help interface. So good person to have on a Revit command reference guide. And then a couple of recent things that are kind of interesting. In the upper left here, I was recently featured on a Dell blog post about how we implemented technology at Lake Flato during the pandemic. And on the right there is a feature article on Arc Daily. And then the lower left is Enscape, just kind of introduction to myself. And let's see. Here's a little quote in Architect magazine that I had on the implementation of VR. This article is authored by Michael Kilkelly. So keep that name in mind. That's going to come up here again in just a few minutes. He and I have some fun history together. This is a little snapshot, or a few snapshots of the production crew that Dell sent to the firm that I worked at in Minneapolis and Duluth, Minnesota. They did a video on VR in AEC. And so we were doing quite a bit with VR and even AR. I have a case study on my blog from 2017 on a rock climbing wall project that I worked on. So I'm going to just give you an overview of my position at Lake Flato. The graphic below is kind of interesting. The the gold blob in the middle is me. And the main purpose of this is to sort of show the overlap that I have. And really, I sort of overlap everything for the most part in some way, shape, or form. But the really kind of important parts are there. And so the next few slides are some slides that I developed internally and presented to the entire company about what my role is and what value proposition this role offers. It all started, interestingly enough, before me, and some of you may have heard of CASE. They're a technology company that doesn't exist anymore, but they've made some tools for Revit, and Lake Flato hired them to do a technology report. And one of the most brilliant things out of that was to hire me. No, it wasn't me particularly, but to hire somebody, a director of technology, to focus on technology and computational design and things like that. So at a high level, my role is split up into 3 main buckets, as you can see in the little cloud there. So 40% of my time in the middle is IT and design technology. Another 40% is something that you probably could already tell that I'm highly interested in, is sustainable and building performance. And then another 20% is marketing and PR, like maybe this presentation, if I'm being honest. So here's this 40% bucket on information and design technology, and it sort of revolves around the bullet points here of setting a vision for the firm and doing ROI studies on hardware and testing, looking for software that might complement our workflow and testing it and validating it and implementing it in a way that is meaningful and people can use it. It's not just something we buy and put on the shelf and say we have it. We want to train staff, because if they don't know how to use it, it's not worth having the software. And then provide documentation and be able to provide support. So that leads into promoting knowledge management practices and then also onboarding new staff. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Just an example here in the lower left, and I noticed my friend Joseph Kim was on. He's a big proponent of Enscape, doing presentations for them and on his YouTube channel. We've been doing a lot in recent months now that Enscape supports custom assets, to add things like a live oak tree, which is really dominant in the Southwest, and buying models of people to make our entourage options more diverse in terms of ethnicity and gender. The 40% bucket around building performance is basically making sure we have the right tools and tools that some tools are done by our building performance, or are used by our building performance group, but the goal is to make tools, democratize the tools, in the sense that we want our designers to be able to do their own analysis. And so we need to pick tools that are easy to use, but still repeatable and predictable and accurate. Those are really important components of picking tools and developing workflows. So for energy modeling, for example, we use Revit and Autodesk Insight. And we just, if any of you are members of the AIA 2030 commitment, the reporting for the annual reporting for your entire firm's portfolio was just due about a week ago. And for all of our projects in SD and DD, we used that workflow to develop the predictive EUI that we reported to the AIA DDX, the document data exchange. But we also use other tools that are in Rhino, like Climate Studio for lighting analysis, and Woofy and Flixo. And so the goal is to communicate those tools that we have and the capabilities that we have, and provide training to staff on a regular basis. And then just-in-time training whenever they need it as well. And then the marketing and PR. So here's a picture. In this picture, you can see this is actually when I was still back in Minnesota before I actually started at Lake Flato in Minnesota, got the house ready and sold it, bought a house here during the pandemic that we bought sight unseen technically. I mean, we saw, FaceTime video of it from our realtor, but we never physically visited it. But I was still suffering from my bad decision as something fun to do, and surprised my wife, who still had to work outside the house because she worked at a Walgreens pharmacy. I had my daughter completely shave my head, like totally bald with a razor, and surprised her as she walked home. And here it was just barely growing back, and I had to do a big webinar with Jeffrey, the Revit kid. So anyways, I have opportunities to do things like this and conferences once they start up again. So if you look back, let me just back up here for a minute. Here's that graphic with the little gold blob that represents design technology. And I have a bigger version of this presentation where it gets into all these overlaps and talking about, what this role, the value that this role will provide the firm in all these areas. So I just picked three kind of to represent the big picture, to not spend too much time. And so project delivery, like, everything that design technology does and in some way ultimately affects and supports project delivery. That's what the firm is there to do, is to deliver a service and create projects that are delivered in various ways. But the tools that we use and the workflows and all the research that we do are not just, to do those things in and of themselves, but ultimately to benefit, really ultimately to benefit the client, so that they have the best possible project that performs optimally and, saves them money typically over the long run. So in this effort, I'm working in close partnership with our BIM manager and one of the partners in particular who's in charge of project delivery. I got to give a plug. So we do have a BIM manager, and there's always been a BIM manager. In fact, if any of you are on Twitter and know Philip Chan, several years ago, he used to be the BIM manager at Lake Flato. Our current BIM manager is Stephen Campbell, and he actually worked at Revit before the Autodesk acquisition, and then 17 years at Autodesk after that. So he's got a really in-depth level of experience around Revit and other Autodesk tools, and has some great behind the scenes stories to share every once in a while as we're working through problems and waiting for some analysis or software to install. But we have lots of initiatives that, in terms of what we'll do for project delivery, developing the detail library and, helping to ensure clash detection happens, and continually managing the template, which is obviously in every firm a living document. And then drilling into something more specific, simulation and parametric design. So again, like I already said, we're constantly looking for tools and workflows that are going to optimize the staff time and the end result. So we do simulations on energy and daylight and wind, CFD, and circulation a little bit in some ways. But important to all of this is validation and accuracy. So like the energy analysis is ASHRAE 140 validated. That's the Autodesk Insight workflow, and it uses DOE 2.2 and Energy Plus. In the near future, I think it'll just use Energy Plus. But that all revolves around the primary BIM platform, which is Revit. And we are only architects and interior designers. So all of our projects we're consulting with other firms for structural and MEP and civil and all sorts of other things like food service and aquatics and acoustics. We use BIM 360 quite a bit. And let's see. And some of these things are aspirational. Like we don't really, going back to that slide, we don't do anything particular with generative design right now. We do use Rhino and Grasshopper and Dynamo and things like that. So here's another area on VR, 3D printing and drones. So just last week or week and a half ago, somebody in our office was doing some training on drones.
You must pass the entire.
What's that? Did somebody have a question? Tony? Or maybe they were just had their mic off by accident. Not a problem. So VR and AR, and now I'm going to get into just design technology in general. But I guess I'll pause for just a moment and see if anybody has any questions on any of what I just covered. I will say that my role at Lake Flato is not going to probably ever be exactly the same as anybody else's role with the same title. Every firm has different needs. Like I mentioned, my previous firm that Kyle also worked at for a while was a multidiscipline firm, and they did a little bit of everything. So you had to be a little bit more open to do, you know, a little bit of everything, civil 3D and all the different disciplines of Revit.
Hey, Dan, I've got a question.
Yep.
With 22 out now for a little while, have you guys made the decision to upgrade to that more so than previous versions? And without going into the detail about the new features and all that, it's sure. A pretty significant upgrade.
Yeah, good question, Eric. And I'll mention too, another shameless plug. I wrote an entire overview on Revit 2022 new features on AEC Bytes website. But I've always been a big advocate for upgrading sooner rather than later. So usually once the first service pack's out or the proper add-ins that you need, like Enscape, for example, but other add-ins like the CTC tools, or if you use ImagineIt's tools, if you rely on those, obviously they have to be available. And since I'm heavily involved in the beta testing, which I'm actually going to talk about later, I have personally a little higher level of confidence. So I've been involved in the betas, and usually before it hits the streets, I've actually updated all of my books because they need to be to the publisher and ready for fall semester, because my books are used by thousands of students every year. And so I have early access to the betas, and so because of that, but I think this isn't too uncommon, is that a lot of firms will wait until the first service pack or about 3 months after it initially is released. And because of the pandemic, Lake Flato really hasn't even deployed 2021. And that's sort of gonna cause us just to skip it mostly. However, we have been installing it as needed. Because we're only mainly one discipline, if we're not the architect of record or some other consultant has a compelling reason to want or need 2021, for example, we'll go ahead and install that and use that for the project. But yeah, Eric's right. There's lots of really great things, particularly around the arbitrary limitations of schedules being lifted for the most part in Revit. Any other questions? All right, so just these next few slides are ones that I put together yesterday, really. So they're not super polished, and I think they're just talking points about anybody who's in this role or aspires to do more in this role. The first thing is just leaning on something that's already been done fairly well is Joseph. He's currently a partner at Gensler and the global director of their design technology studio. Back in 2011, he gave this presentation, which probably is still 85%, 90% accurate. I'm sure there's a few new terms that have been thrown into the mix, but you can go look up this Autodesk University class number and see a really good presentation on all the different titles that exist. You know, BIM manager, CAD manager, CAD captain, Revit captain, BIM captain. You know, there's lots of different terms out there. And as I mentioned at Lake Flato, it's a 120 person firm. So it's not a huge firm. It's not a particularly small firm either. But as I already said, we have a BIM manager and then a director of design technology. Those are our titles. It's always good to read up on topics that you're interested in or are aspiring to work in. And these are two really great books. I have both of these on the shelf behind me somewhere. So a couple of books that I have and have read. So Randy Deutsch, the Super Users book. Has anybody here read this book? Just like when I teach, I'm going to put you all on the spot. Make sure I haven't put you to sleep yet. So this is a really good book. It's like right on point for the topic that we're talking about. Randy goes into some great detail about talking to people who have decided to take a path like mine in practice and kind of mapping out their career trajectory, which sometimes is a little tricky. Typically, this path doesn't lead to being the CEO of the company. And then he also maps several people who have decided to sort of jump the tracks and go into the software development realm, you know, going to work for Autodesk or Enscape or, you know, companies like that. So it's really interesting. I found it really insightful and just in thinking about my career. And I read it before I made the change to where I'm at now. So maybe it even influenced that. Probably did. And then this other book is Philip Bernstein. I mentioned his name earlier. So he was the AEC vice president, I believe, at Autodesk for many years. He signed my book. Before that, he actually worked at Caesar Pelli's office. And he and I actually worked on a project together, super indirectly. He wrote the contract for the University of Minnesota Duluth Weber Music Hall. And I was on the design team for the Architect of Record, which at the time was called Stine Johnson Architects. And now he's a professor of architecture at Yale. So he wrote this book, Architecture Design Data, Practice Competency in the Era of Computation. So there's several other books out there that you can read. Let's see, I got one other one. This is the problem when you go off script. So this is a really good book that is really more of a business book. It's called The Lean Startup. And it just talks about developing an idea or a product in a generic way that really can apply to anything in any situation, creating the minimal viable product and getting that out in front of your users. So in terms of a tool internally or content or something, getting some version of it that's working out in front of your users and have them start testing it and provide feedback, rather than the worst case scenario where you think you know what everybody wants and you develop it to its fullest and put it out there, and nobody wants to use it because it's not what they wanted. So that's the Lean Startup by Eric Ries, R-I-E-S. Communication is really important in design technology. So at Lake Flato, we use knowledge architecture, their synthesis tool, which is basically a intranet site for architects and engineers. Because the folks who work there have this background, they're highly aware of what the needs are within the industry. So it's a really useful tool for disseminating and organizing information. Anybody else, anybody on the call use this, or your firm uses this?
Yeah, we're using it at Shy Pottery.
Cool. So here you can see just a few days ago, I shared a Revit tip and on rotating a section box, but there's a whole variety of things that anybody can post. All they have to do is click on the share something in one of these topics, one of these main topics at the top, and they can share things. And then this also has a really great app on your phone, which facilitates looking up other people's phone numbers and even getting right into a text message to them. And then seeing this information just to make it more widely available. And they also have some really great analytics, so you can see what your penetration rate is in your staff to make sure people are seeing this information. This is sort of a random share, and I guess I don't know how generic this is. Maybe this is still just on my roll, I suppose. But this is my Lake Flato drop down in Chrome for different tools that I use on a fairly regular basis. So our Flake net is that intranet, and then Arc Smarter Trello. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but this is some custom tools that we're having developed by Michael Kilkelly. Case is a resource management tool. I think it used to be owned by Dell. I don't know if it still is, but it allows you to basically search for a user's computer and instantly see like how much RAM they have and what graphics card they have. And, it can do other things like push out updates, and TeamViewer is a really great tool for providing support. And another cool thing that it can do is if you're doing remote training, one screen, like both sides can have it set up so one screen is the other person's screen and then one screen's your screen. So it mimics more like sitting next to somebody. You say, move your mouse here and pick this, and you just look over at your other screen and see them do that. But it's also it has some really powerful support features as well. Can even remote power on computers when it's set up correctly within your organization. Miro is a really powerful cloud-based collaboration tool. Is anybody using this? So
Yeah, we use it for our local AIA chapter.
All right, cool. Yeah, we use it quite a bit. In fact, a week ago, Miro hired a production crew in Austin to basically make a video that, in the end will be like 2 or 3 minutes long, but about Lake Flato using Miro. It's actually, architecture is a really small percentage, I think, of their user base. They have a lot of software developers and process engineering type customers, but it's a really awesome tool. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier that I am working on at Lake Flato, and we're using Miro for this. We were hired by the AIA in partnership with Bureau Happold. We're currently working on and the title is going to change, it sounds like, but it's initially called the AIA Climate Action Guide for Practice. So it's a parallel to it's basically a parallel to some of their other documents, like the AIA Quote Top 10 Toolkit. And we used Miro to host a subject matter expert, a couple of meetings with folks to, everybody was sent an invite and they were able to add post-it notes and comments and things like that to the document as we were presenting the organization, what the organization of the document should be and what topics should be covered. Ulio is a great tool to take like an Enscape stereo panorama and load a bunch of those into Ulio, and Ulio then allows you to stitch those together in such a way where you can load them into an Oculus Go or a Quest 2, and you or the client can basically hyperlink between different vantage points within the same project. So CTC's Hive is their online content management tool. So all of our content lives in Hive, which happens to be in the cloud. I've been doing some really cool stuff. This gets into some of the beta testing I'll talk about later, but NVIDIA's Cloud XR, where I'm able to take an Amazon AWS workstation instance, which is 2,000 miles away from me, put on the Oculus Quest 2 wireless on the Amazon workstation, fire up Enscape, click this custom app that NVIDIA created within the Oculus, and then enable VR in Enscape, and it streams it 2,000 miles away to my headset, which is wireless and surprisingly good quality. I'm going to do a blog post about that in the near future. So Barco is the conference room equipment that we use, and of course the Autodesk stuff. And then, as I mentioned, custom tools. So bigger firms tend to have, and when I say bigger, you know, this can vary, but you know, some of the firms out there can be thousands of people. So it seems like most of them tend to have in-house custom development resources that are doing things with Vision and Deltek and Autodesk, you know, Revit, AutoCAD, add-ins and things like that. So we hired Michael Kilkelly to make this custom tab for us. And some of these things are just links to internal resources in our intranet. And then there's a couple of tools, and then PY Revit, there's a few favorites that we like to promote, and it's I don't know if it's open source, but we checked and it's totally okay because it's all openly available on GitHub. We took some of those out and just plugged them into our tab rather than having the PY Revit tab, which has a ton of stuff on it, and some of them we might not want staff to use, and some of them we expect that they probably won't need. So this is just highlighting the favorites and saving a little room on the list of tabs that everybody has. And then here you can see, this is my second to last slide. It's the roughest one of all. So when it comes to beta testing, if you're not already, I highly, highly recommend that you get involved in Autodesk's feedback community. This, in my opinion, this gives you the right to complain about Autodesk. If you're not involved here, you shouldn't be complaining too much, because pretty much everybody can sign up and get access to this, and a lot of the Autodesk developers and decision makers are here. And while they may not always listen to you, at least it's probably the most direct route, other than Revit ideas, to get your ideas heard. And also in the while tools are being developed, or features or whatever, or enhancements are being developed, the whole point is to download a beta version of the software, test it like on your real project, and try and find what's wrong with that workflow, because it's a big complicated program, and they don't always figure out all the problems that are going to come up with the way people use the software. So highly, highly recommend you do this. Like I said, it gives you access to what is often a monthly update. So the month after Revit 2022 came out, the next beta version, which really didn't have much in the way of new features, or it had some that weren't ready for 2022 that are still being worked on. You have the ability to download or use a cloud version of Revit so that you don't have to put any software on your computer that might corrupt a production version of Revit. So follow this link and get involved. It's a really great experience. I've had many things that I've commented on and been part of over the years that Autodesk has tweaked or implemented, you know, and I know it was because of things I suggested. And one of the cool things that resulted out of this, you know, high level of involvement was Autodesk invited me 3 years ago to their Autodesk Shanghai office for an entire week. I had to get myself there, which my previous company had paid for, but then Autodesk paid for the hotel and all the food, and it was a really cool experience. One night they took us to the Shanghai Tower, which is the tallest building in Asia. Unfortunately, it was super cloudy out and you couldn't even see the next building a block away, but we were up there pretty high and went on a really fun elevator ride. As I mentioned, the Cloud XR, I've been doing some testing with NVIDIA, and we also have, not directly, but through a provider called White Hat in Austin, we have 2 NVIDIA A40 cards in a host that we're testing, which is the next gen RTX graphics card. Had some pretty promising results using Enscape and many users, and each like 8 users on the system. So each user has a 12 gig graphics card memory space. And then Enscape also has a preview build that's available fairly regularly. If you go to their downloads page down below in really small writing, anybody can download it, but you obviously have to have an Enscape license to be able to use it. Is a rolling preview build with new features that they're adding. And then my last slide, going back to where I started. This was my quote unquote urban chicken coop back in Duluth, Minnesota, that I don't plan on redoing here in Texas. Be too hot and smelly. So I guess now we have 12 minutes left or so. Can open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Gotta unmute first. Oh, Dan, does like Flato have people under the BIM manager to help with tasks on a project level?
No, but if there's a specific task, a lot of times we'll have somebody internally who's really interested in developing wall types for fire and STC ratings, for example, or materials that might tie into tally for embodied carbon, you know, things like that. There's usually somebody who sort of is willing to spend some of their time. It would be nice to have another person, but as you can imagine, before me, there was just one person, right? That supported the entire firm. And at my previous firm, I was the only person that supported 280 people and more disciplines and topics than I have fingers. So it's that's staffing and support is definitely an interesting topic. I see, Jason, too, you asked if the slides will be available. Probably not, but this session was recorded, so you can go back and refer to the recorded session.
Yeah, the talent pool is pretty slim for getting some of the, you know, the technical side of things accomplished.
Yeah, I should say though, at my previous firm, we had for quite a few years, we had an intern usually from a technical college, 1 year from Dunwoody, which is an architecture program in Minneapolis, that would help. So that's a good resource.
Thank you.
So yeah, I see Jason. Oh, I guess that's a direct message, but you mentioned your meeting with Ian Malloy, and again, yeah, I think you're in the beta, so there's a good opportunity to comment there on MEP related things. I'm also on the BIM standards committee for IES, the Illuminating Engineering Society, and you know, there's ongoing discussions there about standards and support. Some of those things are great opportunities for third parties to step in and offer something, but certainly there are lots of areas where Revit needs to help us out, like 3-way and 4-way switches for lighting. So there's a question about suggestions on getting firm buy-in to a role like this. I'm a BIM manager and do almost all the tasks and serve these different buckets. I am the only person though, so I can't put enough energy into all of them. Yeah, and really that's if you read that book, Super Users, that's going to speak to that in some ways. So I think you need to make a concerted effort to document the need, and you take that BIM titles presentation and just develop a value proposition for that higher level role, and then backfilling your BIM manager role, right? If that's how it's going to be structured. Like I said, every firm's a little different, and that Super Users book really speaks to the challenges and the value. If a firm places value on that position, the benefits it results in, and of course the negative is if they don't value that, the person, you know, typically ends up leaving. Could be for another firm, could be to jump the rails and go to the software side of things. But you need to make a case for it, and in this case, like Flato hired case, and I'm totally drawing a blank of like the person's name and his company. I should know it, but the person who actually did the report and worked that case, his company's still around.
When a project comes up at Lake Flato, do you have an initial 0% conversation about what technology you want to use on that project? Because the issue we kind of run into is project scale. The project's so small, we really just want to get the construction documents done and out the door. We're not really here to show clients this or that.
Yeah, I guess so. A good percentage, I don't know what the percentage is. I should probably know that. If you're familiar with Lake Flato, you know we do quite a bit of single family residence projects. And I guess I'll just say at Lake Flato, every project's done in Revit. Nothing's ever done in AutoCAD. And even for those small projects where the client, you know, they're building a home for themselves, and it, you know, it's something that we want to, you know, convey the design intent and the experience just as much as any other project. So those projects are done in Revit, and they almost always use VR. All of our projects, partly because of the AIA 2030 commitment, we're doing energy modeling on. So the projects really need to be modeled in Revit and to a level that's you know, reasonable to do the analysis, like create a energy analysis model to push out to Insight. So I would say the side benefits of creating the model in being able to do energy modeling, daylighting, point-by-point illuminance calculations in some cases, and VR and even AR. So Fuser makes a really awesome pathway from Revit to the HoloLens. So FUZOR, I believe it is. So from within Revit, you click upload to Fuser, sort of like go into Enscape. And then from there, you can tell it to optimize for HoloLens, and it'll push it to a Dropbox folder that's already been synced on your HoloLens. And the cool thing there is it automatically ties a voice command to every Revit category. So you could say, isolate ductwork, and everything in the building disappears except for ductwork. And then you say, show all, and everything comes back. And then there's some things like reset the menu, and this voice says in your ear, like, should I reset the menu? And you say yes. So I guess, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, would agree there. You have oversight of the company giving direction on what kind of technology you want to use and the projects. What about your consultants? So that's another thing we run into is we're using a certain level, but our consultants on the PME side might be still using AutoCAD. They might be still using something more generic. How have you been bridging the gap there? I'm sorry for maybe getting into the weeds here.
No, that's a good topic. So a BIM execution plan is really important. We have ours, I suppose, is a little more streamlined. I don't like the 100-page BIM execution plans. Sometimes that's tied in contractually as well. Probably not as much as I would like it to be, but a BIM execution plan where everybody's on the same page early on about what tools are going to be used and what workflows. Obviously, the version of Revit is really important. It's, I don't know, I guess I don't know that we've had a problem since I've been here about somebody wanting to use AutoCAD on a project. Maybe some really specific consultants, but in general, MEP, structural, they're always Revit. And then on the civil side, the preferred scenario, which this is probably more a better example, is to have the proper surface created in civil with profiles and styles that define the curb and gutter properly, and islands and ped ramps and the crown and the road, and that be published using BIM 360's publish surface command, which will put a version of that surface in BIM 360, which then can be linked into Revit. I've done a blog post on that, and I even presented at Autodesk University with one of the Autodesk developers from the Shanghai office on this workflow, and you can get a perfect representation of the civil 3D surface in Revit, perfectly vertical retaining walls and loading docks and risers and steps. And if you cut a section through the road, you'll see the crown in the road and the exact profile of the curb and gutter. Things that, Revit's built-in topo surface just doesn't have a chance of making anything that accurate.
Yeah, so Dan, as we wrap up here, on behalf of the CoBUG committee, I want to thank you for your time today, your willingness to participate here and elsewhere. It's interesting that, you posted on your blog, and we've got a lot of fresh faces to see. So the benefit of the Zoom call is it doesn't really matter where here is, and so it's a little bit more likely that people from other user groups or other sites will come and visit. And it's fascinating what a small and tight-knit community it is. All the regulars you mentioned, Michael Kokele and Jeff Pinero, the Revit kid, and just keep seeing all these faces, familiar faces, and they become more and more friendly. So again, thank you so much. I'd ask what you do in your spare time, but I don't know that you have much. So again,
have
Really appreciate it.
a wife and 2 kids, and we've done so many escape rooms that my daughter now works at one. Joseph Kim used to work at an escape room corporate company. All right, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity and great meeting lots of new people. Thanks for all the good questions. I see a couple came in at the end. Sorry I didn't get to them. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to follow up with any additional questions or comments.